And this brought them a lot of respect. The other tribes would respect Quraysh just because they are the ones who take care of the house of God in Arabia. They are the ones who host the annual pilgrimage, which people would make to their gods in Mecca or in the Kaaba. The Quraysh were considered the most honored tribe of Arabia. They were the keepers of the house of God. They were also the most educated tribe in Arabia. So this was a time when literacy is something which was not common. Many people could not read and write, but in Mecca, the tribe of Quraysh was more learned, or relatively learned. We cannot say that everyone was learned in this tribe, but they were more relatively learned than the rest of Arabia. They were also financially stronger than the rest of Arabia. And the reason for that was that the annual pilgrimage would bring a lot of trade. A lot of caravans would come from up north in Syria and down south in Yemen. And in the pilgrimage season, when all of Arabia would gather in Mecca to worship their gods in the Kaaba, they would bring along silks, they would bring along spices, they would bring along wheat, cotton. There was a lot of trade which was going on in Mecca, which brought in a lot of money. So this made the Quraysh richer than the other tribes of Arabia. So they were economically as well as financially or in their literature, in their literacy, they were better than the rest of the Arabian Peninsula. The Quraysh had also established trade links with the Roman and the Persian Empire. So they had some relationship with the Romans and the Persians. And they would send caravans and they would bring back a lot of profits. This also meant that they were aware of the larger world. The rest of Arabia would hardly travel outside the Arabian Peninsula. And when you don't travel outside your homeland, then that means that your thinking becomes very narrow, because you only think from one perspective, the perspective you have grown up with. And by the way, this is one of the problems we have in the West. People hardly ever travel outside their countries. I have met people who have not traveled outside their counties in the United States. They have lived and died in the same county. And the only thing they get their information from is a small box which is sitting in the middle of their house, the television, which is one of the most unreliable pieces of sources of information about the world around us. So the Quraysh, since they used to travel due to business and due to trade, they would come into contact with other people, other cultures, other languages. So they had this open-mindedness about them. So they were willing to explore and willing to tolerate different kinds of cultures or different kinds of people. And that is why you will see in Mecca there was diversity. Not just in Mecca, but also in Arabia. You have a lot of diversity, people following different religions. And we're going to talk about these religions in a little bit. The Quraysh were the most educated, the most eloquent, the most courageous of people, or at least this was what their image was in Arabia. At the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the Quraysh were being led by a group of leaders. So they did not have one overwhelming leadership or one person they would attribute leadership to. What they had come up with was a system of each sub-tribe within the Quraysh. So the Quraysh is the tribe, and then within the Quraysh there are these sub-tribes. Each sub-tribe would have representation in this leadership. So it was more like a panel of leadership, which represented the whole of Quraysh. But there was one figure known as Abu Sufyan, who was seen as the ultimate leader, even though he was not, he did not have the veto power to go against this panel of leaders, but he was seen as the most honorable, as the most powerful man in Mecca, and so in Arabia, because if you're strong in Mecca, then that means you're strong in Arabia. The leaders would gather around the Kaaba for their meetings to make important decisions on life, on economy, on the pilgrimage, the annual pilgrimage, on religion, on the idols. So they would gather around the Kaaba. So the Kaaba was not only a religious center for the Arabs, but it also became a political center, or more like a congress, more like a parliament, where these leaders of Arabia would gather and they would make their decisions. So this was the tribe of Quraysh, very important tribe in Mecca, the most powerful tribe in Arabia. So let's finally talk about the religions in Arabia. So what had happened to monotheism? We talked in our previous episodes about Ishmael being settled in Mecca with his mother Hagar, and then he marrying from the tribe of Jurhum, and how the Arab nation started. But this Arab nation was a monotheistic nation. Remember, they were children of Abraham, and Abraham was a prophet of God, the father of the monotheistic prophets. And Ishmael, his son, was obviously a monotheist. So how then, in the year 570 CE, we suddenly see a plethora of idols sitting in the Kaaba and people worshipping all kinds of gods? So what had happened was that over time, after Ishmael, the Arab people had slowly but surely sank into this pit of polytheism. And what had happened was that in the line of Ishmael, there were no prophets sent after him. In the other line, which is the line of Isaac, you see prophet after prophet after prophet, which meant that monotheism would survive in that line. But from this other line, in the line of Ishmael, there was no prophet after Ishmael until the final one, which is Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who came 2,000 years later. So what had happened was that the Arabs, who started off as monotheists, who worshipped only Allah in the Kaaba, in the sanctuary in Mecca, which was built by Abraham, they started getting influenced by the Romans up north and some of the other cultures around them who used to worship idols. So the story goes on that one of these people, one of the tribal leaders in Arabia, he went up north in Syria and he saw the Romans worshipping certain idols. And he did not see any problem in that. So he brought back a huge idol and he placed it in the middle of Mecca in the Kaaba, and he told the people to start worshipping this idol. And the people, obviously, they wanted a god for themselves as well. Because in Islam, or in the monotheistic religions, Allah is an unseen God. You don't have an idol for Allah. You do not have a picture for Allah. And it has always been human desire to have a more finite, a more visible God in front of them, so that they can worship this God and they can relate to it more than this unseen God. And that is why many have gone astray. And Satan has used this human desire and has made it grow over time and become so strong in the human heart that the human heart desires an idol to be worshipped. So these people, they started worshipping this idol. And then over time, each tribe came up with their own idol. Because you have to remember, there was tribal rivalry between the Arabs. So let's say if the Quraysh have a tribe, then why not us? Our tribe should also have, if the Quraysh have a god, then why not us? We should also have our own god. And so what happened was that all the tribes came up with their own deities. And then after that, this spread within the tribes, and each household started having their own god. And then it spread to individuals, where there were individuals who would have their own gods. They would construct their own gods out of wood, out of clay, out of stone, and they would put these gods in their houses, and they would have a tribal god sitting in Mecca. So in the year 570 CE, we see the Kaaba was surrounded by close to 360 idols. And these tribes, which were once monotheistic tribes, now became polytheistic, and they used to make their annual pilgrimage not to worship Allah, but now to worship their deity or their god, which was sitting in the Kaaba. And this meant that the Quraysh became even stronger, because now they were not just the custodians of the house